I'm very pleased to welcome you to this episode of Thrive With Us. Today, we're going to be speaking about anxiety, which is one of the most common mental health challenges that many studies are finding up to 1 in 3 people will experience over the course of their lifetime. I'm here today with Dr. Elif Celebi from Thrive Wellbeing Center. She has a PhD in psychology from the University of Missouri, and she has been with us since February 2021. And I'm so excited to be able to pick her brain about what anxiety is and what are the different things that we can do to try to manage it. Welcome.
Thank you.
So tell me, anxiety. I am imagining it's something that you're seeing quite a bit of in your clinical practice. So what are you noticing? How is it showing up?
As you said, Sarah, it's very, very common. So that's why I chose today to talk about this. And maybe we can start with the definition of anxiety and what I see different manifestations of anxiety. So we can define anxiety as nervousness, worrying about something unknown in the future. And maybe it would be helpful to include to this definition, fear and planning.
Okay.
Because how anxiety is different than fear and planning. So as we know, we need emotions to survive. We have some survival emotions, and fear is one of them. So with fear, we know we need to run away from danger and threats. So fear is there in the moment, telling us there's a danger, there's a threat, run away from it. However, anxiety is about something in the future, unknown. Right, so we don't know if there will be a threat, what kind of threat there will be in the future. So our brains, our survival brains, are trying to come up with this information. So information is like food for our brains, right? So find out about this situation, think about it, worry about it, try to clarify uncertainty. Our survival brains don't like uncertainty. So anxiety is a way that is kind of created to cope with this uncertainty, but it also creates certain problems. So to answer your question, how I see anxiety is very common. A lot of people will name it when they come in. They will say, I am anxious. They may not be aware moment to moment in their daily lives how ubiquitous, how common, how pervasive their anxiety is. That's why I'm calling it a habit. So it becomes automatic or habitual in ways of thinking, action urges before we do a behavior, this kind of urge or instinct to do this behavior, inability to control or stop these behaviors, and I'm going to call worrying a behavior, also a mental behavior. So worrying is the most common example for anxiety. It's going to be a behavior also. So it kind of dictates our lives, controls our lives to a cost. It creates a lot of mental suffering. It creates bodily symptoms.
Yes.
It may exacerbate already existing physiological problems like ulcers, IBS, headaches. If you have bodily conditions, physiological conditions, they may be exacerbated by anxiety as well. So it has a lot of causes and effects in our daily lives. And this is why I wanted to kind of clarify first, define anxiety, and how is it different than fear?
Yes, I think it's really helpful to be able to clarify because anxiety, I think, like with many other mental health terms, can sometimes be used in a way that's not necessarily accurate, and people can have a tendency to over or under label. So walking through the definition, I think, is really helpful. Part of the definition or part of the process that you discussed was this concept of uncertainty and this idea that we don't like it. At the same time, it's a part of life, and not to dwell too much on the pandemic now that we're kind of through the other side, but that was really a significant time of uncertainty and ambiguity. And I don't know about you in your practice, but across the board, what I was noticing in the community and at Thrive is just this spike, not only in health anxiety, but in anxiety symptoms. People were so worried about what was happening and the what ifs. What if this happens and what if this continues and so on? And it was, as you said, coming out in so many ways. It was the mental distress as well as a lot of the physiological symptoms. So did you notice any shifts lately in the presentation or frequency of anxiety, or has it always been a pretty big thing in your practice?
That's the thing about anxiety. If it's there, it wants to attach to anything and everything. So if it's not COVID, it's going to be something else. And most of in my practice, I see a lot of work related, performance related, procrastination related, and I'm going to explain how procrastination is related to anxiety as well. But speaking of underdiagnosis or overdiagnosis, it's definitely diagnosed or under noticed, identified. And you don't have to have a diagnosis per se, a clinical diagnosis, for it to affect your life. And most of the people I see in my practice, that it reaches a point where it affects their lives, even though it may not reach the whole clinical, what we call the symptoms or the presentations, but it is still affect people's lives. So
okay. So we're going to see what it looks like and how it's presenting in different contexts, including work, and some strategies on how to manage anxiety as a habit, as you mentioned before.
Exactly. So when I say habit, let me explain what I mean by this. So every habit has 3 elements to it. And my purpose here is to be able to give our listeners some kind of tools and skills that they can use in their lives. But these skills aren't necessarily do this or do that. I can give some examples, mindfulness skills or techniques like that as well, strategies, coping skills. But I think what can be most helpful is to be able to be our own therapist and kind of like use a model to understand what's going on in our anxiety as a mechanism. So we're going to use this term called habit loop. Loop is something that perpetuates itself. It recycles itself, unfortunately, in a negative way. Perpetuates itself. So every habit loop has 3 elements: a trigger, a behavior, and a result that keeps it going. So let's look at our survival brains again. So our survival brains have to survive and find food, right? So when we find food somewhere, brain is telling, okay, remember what you found and where you found it, because this is good, right? It's like you find the food, which is the trigger, you eat it, which is the behavior, and then you feel satisfaction, right? Like it's just the food, you need it. So similarly with avoidance of threat or danger, like we see something that is like dangerous and a threat, and again remember to run away from it, so which creates avoidance. So if we take these 2 examples and apply it to anxiety as a habit, it works in a similar way. Let's take the example of worrying. So with the example of worrying, as I said, worrying is a mental behavior. So the trigger could be anything, intrinsic or external, like you said, COVID. Intrinsic could be about, well, I'm thinking about, I have this work project, I have to get it done. Right, so it could be anything, and trigger isn't that important. Because trigger, we cannot stop it. Life is like full of, there will always be triggers. Behavior is mental behavior of worrying. If that's the case for us, then it gives us a sense of kind of control as a result. So you may not notice it as much. You know what? How could worrying be good? What do I get out of it? But there is a sense of making it habitual. It gives you a sense of reducing the uncertainty. As I said, information is like the food for the brain. So you're going through the scenarios, you're kind of maybe doing a mental checklist, you are prepping again and again and again, rehearsing again and again and again. This is something that I see a lot, over prepping. Rehearsing more than necessary. So when we do that, because it reduces the uncertainty, it gives us a kind of quick sense of control, which is better than doing nothing. So we may get quickly addicted to this, and I'm calling this addiction because it has a cost to it. And that we get kind of hooked on it and we keep doing it because it's better than doing nothing. That's one example. Another example could be driving anxiety, which I also see a lot. Not a lot, but I've seen some. So if a client says, I'm afraid to go on the highway with my car, so I'm just going to avoid it for now, and then I'm not going to drive, so which feels okay. So here the trigger is driving in the highway. The behavior is avoiding it, and the result is some kind of relief again. So I didn't have to face it. So this relief makes it keep going, perpetuates it. Procrastination. How could procrastination be a habit loop? When we look at, again, intrinsic or external triggers, like this work project coming up, it brings some negative emotions. So I'm just going to binge watch Netflix, which is the result is kind of a temporary relief, temporary satisfaction, escapism, which if it has long-term consequences, negative consequences, then it is procrastination, because you're postponing, and then at the end you have this negative feelings of low self-efficacy, maybe shame, maybe this, again, in the long run, I can only get work done the night before, which causes problems for personal or professional lives.
So I'm hearing from you a lot of really helpful and important information about how it can be a habit and how anxiety can serve us and manifest in certain ways. And two of the main things that I'm hearing from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, is one of the things that can happen is there can be this fear about something, and then we engage in avoidance, and we're able to engage in that avoidance for long enough that it's relatively effective for us. And the other thing is that we think about every possible hole, gap, and scenario, and we think that if I can predict any of the 8 billion things that can go wrong, I will have a little bit more control and a little bit more safety, which makes sense. However, I would imagine that there is a mental tax on doing that, even if it's something that brings you a sense of relief because you've figured out or identified different things that you need to bear in mind. At the same time, it's draining, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's very draining. And that's, I think, when people start to notice there's something going on. Why am I exhausted all the time? Why can't I concentrate on what I need to concentrate? So if you are busy kind of calculating every little scenario, like you said, then there will be mental exhaustion. And at work, then let's say I'm at work and I start to worry about this presentation at the end of the week, and I cannot concentrate on what I'm doing. Now, next, there's a risk that I will start to worry about worrying.
Yes.
Oh my God, I cannot get this work done. Then what is how am I going to get this done? Then I start to worry about worrying, which is called snowballing. And I always teach my clients this term, because if you notice snowballing, then you really have a chance to do something different about it. And the research shows that it may not be the worry, the initial fear. I'm afraid to be judged in front of others if I'm presenting, which is like a primal fear, which is normal, right? But if it starts to snowballing means now I'm worrying about worrying because I cannot concentrate on the task itself, right? So then we have a problem. Research shows that this kind of physiological arousal is not good for us. Because what I mean by arousal is the tenseness on the shoulders, the tenseness on the head, the headaches, this whole being.
Yes.
We cannot, if we cannot relax, that's going to take a toll on us. And the concept of flow. Flow is the opposite of anxiety. So when we're in flow, we are able to let go, concentrate, maybe enjoy even the moment, as opposed to physiological arousal that is kind of giving us this negative cycle. I am worried about not being able to concentrate. Now I'm actually tired, and now I'm exhausted.
And I didn't concentrate, so it ends up being a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy on top of the snowball effect that you're
Exactly.
describing.
So when I describe this to my clients, it clicks. And these are all components in these cycles. So what we've described so far is this, how we acquire these cycles of worrying, or it seems like planning at first. I am planning. May come with the scenarios of what if, right? What if is a highlight of anxiety monster. I also call it anxiety monster. Is kind of waiting in the background to attach itself to anything and everything. And one of the most common questions that anxiety monster uses to be able to create this kind of like worrying or other cycles is the question of what if. What if this happens? What if that happens? So with the difference between real planning, which is effective, efficient, it's not making you tired, you're coming up with problem solving solutions, versus physiological arousal, tenseness, fatigue, exhaustion, and worrying about worrying, which is snowballing, is, I think it's a major difference. The first one is more effective. The other one isn't. So what if question may pose as planning. I'm just going to plan for this scenario, that scenario. So the problem with that is many problems. One, we cannot prepare for any and every scenario in life. There is some uncertainty involved. And also, once we plan some, then we need to let go, because we don't need to plan it 3, 4, 5, hundreds of times, the same scenario, right? So then we can make a differentiation between the two. The other question that is also common, when people come with anxiety, they ask, why am I anxious? So if they're noticing that they're anxious and they start to wonder, if I can only find out the root cause, why am I anxious, then I will be able to solve it. Or maybe they are wondering, you know what, I checked this box, this is okay, why am I still anxious? So this is also another question anxiety monster is posing to us, to be able to attach itself to more anxiety, because there is this illusion of control again. Only if I find out exactly what the problem is, then I'll be able to
fix it. Yeah. The snowballing, I think, is really, really helpful. And I can definitely see why it would make things click for a lot of your clients. As you were describing it, the thing that came to my mind was waking up in the middle of the night, thinking about something that, needs to be done or was left unfinished, or just something big that's happening soon. And realizing that, hey, it's 3 a.m. and I have to wake up at 6. And if I go to sleep now, I'll get 3 more hours, and then can't go to sleep. Half an hour later, it's like, now I only have 2.5 more hours of sleep. Now I only have 2 more hours of sleep. And then you end up fixating on this countdown timer, which then ends up making it much more difficult to sleep. So I think it's very helpful to identify when something starts, and then it starts to magnify, to try and nip it in the bud as much as possible, because I would imagine that awareness is the first step to redirecting things.
Exactly. So that's a really good example, Sarah, with the sleep, right? So taking it kind of personal, identifying with it, and why can't I deal with this situation better? It sounds like self-judgment, right?
True.
Anxiety loves self-judgment. And I think people who are good people in their heart, and they want to improve themselves, that they may be kind of thinking judgment terms. If I judge myself, that I can do better next time. But again, this kind of judgment also creates this bodily and mental constriction that is not very, appropriate for any kind of like growth mindset. So we need to kind of to be able to see the difference between, I'm beating myself down, judging myself, maybe with the fear of self-indulging. Like if I indulge myself, then I won't be able to get anything done. This is also a common thread I
It's a
see.
very black and white, and it's something that I've seen a lot of. And a lot of times when people that I've met with, usually in the context of a couple, come and say, I notice I have these perfectionistic tendencies, okay, and there's a lot of self-criticism and self-judgment, as you mentioned, and a desire to do it differently. But there is this idea that it's black and white. I'm either going to be this like hardcore perfectionist who beats myself up from any deviation and then doesn't give myself credit when I don't deviate, or I'm just going to be this like hippy dippy person that doesn't care about anything. And there is no space whatsoever for the gray. And I think that's something quite common in presentations of anxiety.
And yes, and if it's like a perfectionism, kind of a part of our personalities that is kind of difficult to detect.
Yes.
Most of the people I work with who show signs of perfectionism, they would never admit to this is kind of negative perfectionism or clinical perfectionism. They would just say, well, that's how it's supposed to be, isn't it?
I have
Right?
high standards.
High standards, right? So perfectionism is also could also be contributing to anxiety in ways, like I said, over planning, not accepting the standards that are posed to us. For example, for work, if we have a work project and then our boss or manager tells us this is what we want from you, and then we look at it and we say, no, that's not enough. I need to go above and beyond.
Yes.
So not accepting the standards as they are and having this urge, having this strong desire to go above and beyond them all the time. And finally, identifying with the outcomes, identifying with the work. This work represents me. It is me that is my work.
Yes.
So with this kind of identification, again, it's very kind of juicy for the anxiety monster to see it and then say, you know, more, it's never enough.
No.
So there is this feeling of not good enough. So where do we draw the line here is, you know, like I never ask people to drop their, you know, excellence. Like you can have progress in mind, you can have excellence, demanding excellence from yourself or from your work. But we need to understand what's effective, what is not effective.
Exactly.
So if you are kind of burning out, you can't sleep all night, next day you are like exhausted, you cannot get the work done, and it's not very sustainable. Is this feasible, sustainable, and effective for you in the long run? Because it could be okay in the short run. The examples I gave you with the procrastination and others, they could feel okay in the short run because there's
You
some
can
kind
manage.
of relief. But in the long run, if it's not sustainable and effective, then the person will feel disappointed, sad, and maybe low self-efficacy. I can never reach my own goals. So how do we create this sense of self-efficacy where you feel like, you know, I have some sense of control that I am able to reach my own goals, whereas this perfectionistic tendencies of this expectations are kind of vague and they're not objective and they're not attainable. They are not on paper. They're just like somewhere like impossible.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that you mentioned now and also ties back to something before is there's a difference between something being sustainable in the short and medium term and in the long term. At the beginning of our conversation, you referenced how anxiety can have physiological manifestations. And there's a reason for that, right? It helps us, and people always give the example of the tiger or like some kind of physical threat. We need our heart rate to accelerate and all of these other things to happen so that we can, you know, fight or flight and we can survive. Our bodies are created and designed for that. The problem now is that we're experiencing mostly psychological stress, and it's psychological stress that doesn't dissipate or decrease, and our bodies cannot cope. After some period of time, we're going to have the symptoms and then the deterioration. We have to have a chance to rest and recuperate. So it's important for people to recognize that, okay, this might help me now, today, like avoiding Sheikh Zayed Road might be okay this week, but like eventually I'm going to have to do it. That I have a pit in my stomach and I'm just going to take a bunch of Tums and Gas X and try and ease the symptom. But eventually I'm going to have to find another solution because it's not sustainable and it's very detrimental not only to my psychological health, but my physical health. So we need to rest and to recuperate and to put some time boundaries on things, I think.
Yeah, exactly. So you pointed to this kind of inability to stop. Mind is always like active, always thinking, always planning. So the problem with that, it's mind is in the future. It's not in the present. So as you said, it's not very sustainable. Another example could be stress eating in ways where it creates another habit loop. If we have a stress coming up, stressful event coming up, and then we have the negative feelings around it, and then the habit, the behavior is eating, and the result is brain detecting, oh my God, this feels good. I feel some kind of relief or satisfaction, escape from my worries, then we're more likely to learn this. So the problem with that is that in the long run, again, it creates problems. If we are gaining weight, we have low sense of self-efficacy, shame, right? There's a lot of shame around this kind of inability to control eating when we're not hungry.
Yeah, and
eating junk food.
And I was just going to say really quickly that the thing is I've never met anyone in my entire life that binge eats kale and broccoli. It's always like fried chicken and chocolate chip cookies, and it's like a quick carbohydrate fix. It makes you feel good in the moment, but then afterwards, when you find like the empty pint of Ben and Jerry's, there is a lot of guilt and shame, and it can have a lot of deleterious consequences. And I think there's even some research with NASA astronauts around how it doesn't even help you feel less stressed. It's just something that we think is going to give us relief, and the relief is so fleeting, but the guilt and shame are not.
Exactly. So I believe if we are not reaching our goals and we're not creating a life that we want to live, eventually at the end, that pleasure or that temporary relief is not going to be very effective. Some research shows that with the stress eating, for example, and I'm going to talk about maybe some interventions next related to this.
Okay.
Then the research shows that if we use mindfulness skills to pay attention to what kind of reward, the result that I'm getting from this ice cream, if you are eating it, paying attention, observing, then it's going to reduce the number of or the speed that you eat. So you don't have to have the whole box finish. You may notice your brain reaches a certain level of satisfaction, relief, or pleasure already, maybe 2 or 3 spoons and you're done. But you can only discover this if you're paying attention. What do I mean by paying attention? So paying attention is firstly understanding these habit loops that I described. So to our listeners, maybe they can come up with some examples from their lives. I have given examples of worrying, driving anxiety in the case of avoidance. We have given the stress eating example. So if they can identify the trigger, behavior, and a result in their own behaviors. And as I said, trigger is not important. We cannot change the triggers, eliminate them, get rid of all the triggers. Because some people think, okay, what is the trigger? What was the trigger? You can identify the trigger, but you cannot change it. You can only change the reward value of the behavior. So for us to be able to change the reward value of the behavior, for example, let's look at the procrastination first. So the person has to identify their loops first. Every time I have these work projects coming up, I tend to go on Netflix, YouTube, Instagram a lot. What's going on? What kind of physical sensations? Have I felt some kind of constriction, heaviness on my chest, tightness around my shoulders, or this sense of maybe boredom in the morning that made me go and watch these stuff more? So when we understand this kind of okay, what is the mental habit loops there that repeat, then we're more likely to kind of intervene and change them. So that's the first step. The second step, once we identify these loops, really asking, as I said, paying attention. Hey, what is going on here? What is the reward value am I getting? This feels good right now, but does it really feel that good?
Yes.
In my third episode on this Netflix show, does it still feel the same as the first? Because usually, if we pay attention, we will find out that the third scoop of ice cream, fifth scoop of ice cream may taste different, may bring a different level of reward.
Mm-hmm.
It cannot be the same. It's going to kind of go down, right? It's
Yes.
not going to taste the same, bring the same kind of pleasure. So by paying attention, we're kind of teaching our brains to recalculate the reward value. Maybe we made a negative prediction error.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of predicted that this is going to be great, continue to feel great. But so we're giving our brain a chance to recalculate this negative prediction error and maybe substitute something else. Instead of this kind of avoidance, escapism, feel good eating, what I recommend is using mindfulness skills of kindness and curiosity.
Okay.
So these are intrinsic senses, right? So every one of us have them. We just don't really tap into them as much. What do I mean by curiosity and kindness is when we have these sensations, behaviors, kind of really paying attention to them and kind of being curious, what is going on here?
Mm-hmm.
What is going on with the not being able to sleep? Instead of saying, like you said, if I can't sleep now, I will have colors in under my eyes, and I'm going to be tired tomorrow. How am I going to be dealing with the snowballing effect?
Yes.
Right. So curiosity is the opposite of this kind of ruminative thinking, perseverative thinking, because curiosity has no judgment. Curiosity is this intrinsic sense of you don't have to force yourself, right, to be curious. Initially, you may have to teach yourself, but so using these superpowers, curiosity, kindness, self-compassion, in order to intervene with these loops and kind of noticing, can I use them against these loops? And reduce the reward value that my mind already learned. So my mind is less likely to do it, less frequently to do it in the future. So I am referring to this program called Unwinding Anxiety by Dr. Judd Brewer. And our listeners, if they're more interested, they can check out his work. There's an app and a book. In his research, his lab finds that when they help people quit smoking, for example, and when they teach them these skills of curiosity and kindness, they have a huge success rate, actually better than some other treatments. Similarly, with emotional eating, stress eating, it may take up to 10 to 15 times of using this attentional skills, mindfulness, curiosity and kindness to notice a reduction
Yes.
in the times that we get caught up in these loops. So I think it's a very nice, it's amazing findings to show the potential of these techniques.
Yeah. And I think, if we zoom back out to the very beginning of the conversation, one of the things we were talking about had to do with the worry. And you very nicely and clearly said that we can think about three different things. The past, we can put that on repeat. We can think about the future, and usually it's the what ifs and all of the things that can potentially go wrong. And where we spend probably a lot of people, especially people who struggle with anxiety, the least amount of time is in the present. And so mindfulness is something that we can use to kind of anchor us in the present. And you mentioned as well that there are these elements that are important for how we approach ourselves. Because if there tends to be this inner critic, this self-judgment, this blame, that's going to show up, right? So by paying attention, trying to kind of be gentle when we're experiencing or getting sucked into these loops, that serves as an entry point for being able to rewire. So mindfulness is definitely a very helpful, and we've seen it's an evidence-based technique for working through anxiety as well as a whole host of other things.
in my personal and professional life, I find it very, very helpful. So I have, firsthand experienced the positive effects of mindfulness. And mindfulness isn't just like sitting down and meditating, formal mindfulness, but in daily life, informal ways of mindfulness, really practicing in ways where am I present in my body right now? My body is here, but where is my mind?
Yes.
Has it like, so it's like very simple ways we can try to bring back the awareness into the body senses, body sensations, and kind of like noticing, scanning, accepting non-judgmentally, doing one thing at a time instead of multitasking. That's another very important one that I find very helpful. Could be, in the long run, help us a lot with these, like breaking these anxiety loops.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen that and also experienced firsthand that mindfulness can be really helpful. And I think, I don't know if you've noticed the same thing, but where a lot of people struggle is it's difficult at the beginning, right? Especially if they're taking a more traditional view of mindfulness. They expect that they're going to be able to just tune everything out and focus and be compassionate and non-judgmental and curious. But just like with everything, it's something that you build over time, and being gentle in your progression of the development of that skill is actually a form of mindfulness, isn't it?
Exactly. Can I teach a very quick,
Yes.
simple technique of mindfulness? So it's called 5-finger breathing.
Okay.
So let's go back to that scenario where this person has the work project coming up and they're all like wound up and tense, and they notice, oh my God, I'm worrying about worrying and I cannot even like focus on the task at hand. It may not be as exaggerated as I described, but it may build up like this. So you may notice the tenseness on the shoulders, the pain on the neck, stomach acid and things like that. So taking a 2-minute break and focusing on the breathing, and you can do this like even open eyes. You don't have to even close your eyes. So using the 5 fingers, and we're gonna start breathing in, breathing out, tracing the fingers, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, and breathing out, breathing in, and breathing out. So we can use our hand to guide our breathing and remind ourselves, okay, I'm going to take a 1 minute, 2 minute breathing break, and then I have a look at what's the task at hand, what's going on. Then maybe we can do some problem solving.
And for anyone that's listening to this in an audio format and not watching what we just did on the video, there was just a simple tracing, moving your finger up as you inhale and down as you exhale, starting from the pinky all the way to the thumb. And what I really liked, I've never actually done this one. What I really liked about it is it's easy to kind of know when to inhale and when to exhale. It's a little bit less complicated than the, count to 4 and all of these other things that maybe you don't want to have to balance while you're engaging in this exercise. But yeah, the other thing is we know that exhalation helps us burn off cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So even on a physiological level, as well as clearing space in the brain, something as simple as breathing can really, 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 really help. And it's something that you can do anywhere at any time.
Exactly. If you have time, I can show others.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. So another technique called willing hands, half smile.
Okay.
So in this technique, we are going to use some body sensations to our advantage. With the loop, remember, trigger, behavior, result. So we want to kind of identify the behavior and we want to kind of intervene there, right? I want to stop the cycle of worrying. So this could be an alternative to that. And research shows that when we have a smile on our face, it's a facial feedback hypothesis. So our brain thinks, okay, there must be something good going on. It's neutral or positive. So as you're showing right now, a half smile is Mona Lisa smile. So just the curves of the lips are up a little bit. It doesn't have to be like complete smile, but
Okay.
just a little bit. And then relaxing the hands. Some people actually don't notice they are clenching their hands.
Yeah.
So notice if you are clenching your hands, then kind of let go, loosen the hands, put them on your lap. Opening up the hands also is kind of a gesture of acceptance. Hey, maybe I'm in a difficult place right now. You know, I'm being tested, I'm being frustrated or angry or anxious. Acceptance is another skill, mindfulness skill, to kind of, I can't change this. I just need to tolerate the pain. So acceptance of the pain that is involved in life, as well as uncertainty, is also part of life. So when we relax the hands, take a deep breath, and relax the face with the half smile, you'll notice the difference.
Oh, and I think for people who may not be familiar with this idea of facial feedback, hypothesis, or loop, we have this expectation or belief that we smile in response to being happy, and that is absolutely true. But what you're saying is we can tell our brain that we are happy with the inverse. Smiling will send that signal to the brain. So we don't have to wait until it's expressed. We can express it and we can feel at least a momentary burst in our mood. And if we couple it with what you were describing, the exercise with the hands, there's a lightness and an acceptance that provides momentary relief and can be utilized when things feel heavy, which can be quite often, especially these days with all of the burdens and responsibilities that we have in this modern world.
Yeah, I taught this technique to a client, and she came back the next week, following week, and she said, you know, this solved 30% of my problems.
Amazing.
30%, that's very significant. So something as simple that we can use as an alternative behavior could be handy and helpful also.
Yes. And there are things, because we've spoken a little bit today about some of the work that you're doing with clients and some of the presentations that are coming into the clinic. Therapy is obviously a very effective intervention and way to help people address some of the issues that they're facing. But anxiety, as we said at the beginning of this episode, is up to 1 in 3 people, and not everyone reaches the need for a therapeutic intervention, but they can still benefit from some of these very basic, very accessible behavioral changes.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of the things, we still have a few minutes, so if we can have a quick chat about this. You and I had discussed the idea about anxiety and how anxiety can coexist with other psychological symptoms and challenges. Maybe you can walk us through what some of those comorbidities are and what to look for.
Yeah, exactly. So I already mentioned just a little bit of stress eating. Research finds that with eating disorders, anxiety is comorbid and very common. So the theory here is eating could be self-medicating.
Okay.
So when the person has anxiety and they are either using eating to cope with these kinds of negative affect, which is anxiety, or they're cutting down and they're not eating, in the case of anorexia, for example, which gives them a sense of control again, which is the antidote to anxiety. So this kind of eating disorders can be considered a kind of a type of addiction. Substance use disorders could be another example. Again, self-medication. Self-medication hypothesis is that I am going to use substances to ease, relieve, or to cope with this negative feelings, anxiety that I have. What is better than, for example, alcohol to, take the edge off, right? Make you help you feel relaxed. Unfortunately, there could be negative consequences to that, but it's easier to kind of like learn this kind of behavior that works for me. So I'm just going to use it.
And even the language, right? You just use the expression, it takes the edge off. That's something that I think all of us have heard somebody say at some point in time. So there is this expectation that by using certain substances and including food, right? That it's going to help you connect with what you need or disconnect from what it is that you need to avoid. And long term, as well as medium term, it's not particularly healthy, and there are other things that we can do. So anxiety is comorbid with eating issues as well as eating disorders. What else do we see it co-occur
Depression,
with?
definitely. Anxiety and depression are coexisting in like 30% of the time. So we really need to look for the other. And there are some approaches instead of they advocate, instead of using diagnostic categories, we need to look at all of these disorders as emotion regulation problems, or emotional behavior problems,
Okay.
or disorders. So the idea behind this transdiagnostic approach is, as I described, kind of like these are similar mechanisms, right? One happens in the case of eating, the other happens in the case of choosing some substances to help with the negative affect. With depression, there's a lot of avoidance, as I described, with driving anxiety, avoiding meaningful activities in life, withdrawing as a result, and withdrawing from life, and as a result, having low self-efficacy, low sense of self eventually. So these are similar mechanisms that will repeat in most of these disorders. So I really think this makes sense to me, that this transdiagnostic approach to understand these kind of disorders, that they all share these common themes. The common theme is this. We have some kind of negative affect, and we do certain behaviors to solve it.
Okay.
So these problematic maladaptive behaviors are solutions to emotional problems. So these maladaptive behaviors of worrying, checking, controlling, stress eating, substance use, withdrawing from activities, they're actually we're trying to help ourselves with self-medication. But eventually we get stuck in these cycles, and they get better of us, and then we cannot find a way out. So psychotherapy, self-help, these kinds of podcasts help us to kind of maybe understand what's clicking here.
Yeah.
How does my emotional difficulties have in common with these models? So
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that professionals do, as well as people accessing Dr. Google, is looking for the different checklists of symptoms and trying to see, do I tick this box? Do I meet the threshold for the diagnostic criteria of X, Y, and Z? What I'm hearing from you is, of course, there's a time and a place and a space, and hopefully under the guidance of a professional. But what I'm hearing from you is, if we look at it sort of more holistically, what we will often find at the root of challenges and suffering is an emotion, and that emotion is prompting certain thoughts and certain behaviors. And once we kind of understand how all of those things are working together, we can figure out an entry point. We talked today about one of the entry points being rewiring the behavior, replacing the behavior with something else. One of the things that we can do is restructuring the thoughts. And hopefully in doing all of that, we will be able to get to the root, and the person will be able to achieve a sense of relief. So very importantly, it's not just about chasing the label or the diagnosis or fulfilling the criteria. It's about understanding what you're feeling, how it's playing out, in order to hopefully empower you to find a solution, whether it's something you do for yourself through accessing information, or something that you do side by side your support system, including a professional.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe going back to anxiety, then what I can say there is, if it's an emotional disorder, quote unquote, right, we experience anxiety, and anxiety is helping us in some ways temporarily, understanding, hey, how is this contributing to those loops?
Yes.
And how can I actually get out of these loops and try something better? Try something better reward in the long run. This could look like accepting, there will be some kind of pain or pressure about this work project. accepting uncertainty in life, understanding in ways how do I actually engage in mental behaviors when my mind is wandering into this,
Yes.
what they call default mode network. Default mode network is when we are not doing something and we're just kind of like thinking mode, which is kind of normal. Research finds that almost half the time we're thinking about something else. But when thinking about something else, then it's kind of self-referential, like what does this make me look like?
Yes.
What's the danger or threat in it for me? So recognizing how our mind, mental patterns are, having some curiosity about it, I think can be very, very helpful in the long run.
And I would imagine that it's easier to do when you're not in the thick of something. So I would invite everyone listening today, hopefully you're not caught up in a really intense work project or in the throes of pressure and anxiety, and just zoom out, take a step back, and try to see where are the loops, because we all have them. And when we have a little bit of space and we're not in it, it can be easier to identify and hopefully put together some sort of plan to prevent or to notice when it's starting to happen, with the ultimate objective, I think, if I'm understanding you correctly, of once we start to spiral or snowball, to be able to let go a little bit.
Exactly. So what you're saying there also debunks the myth of motivation and willpower. So willpower and motivation theory will say just don't do it, just stop doing it, which doesn't work. Like stop stress eating, stop drinking, stop worrying, right?
If you were strong enough, you'd be able to do it.
Yeah, we won't be able to in the thick of it when we need it the most. So these motivation and willpower hypotheses don't really work because our brains don't work like that.
No.
The only way to change a behavior is through that reward value and understand how this has created those loops for me because I'm getting something out of it.
Yeah, how it's what it's serving, and trying to find a way to replace it with something that is more effective, but then also approaching yourself with that compassion and curiosity and understanding, because it is a very normal and natural thing, even if it doesn't feel so nice when it happens so often.
And the difficulty with replacing it with another behavior could be we have to be careful about not finding another addiction if it's kind of an addictive quality. For example, if we are anxious and we start exercising.
Yes.
Now, I've seen some people where they get an injury and they cannot exercise, then that's really bad because now they're addicted to exercise. Exercise is great for mental health.
Totally.
Keep doing it, but also there could be moments where we need to accept and tolerate and be with the pain. And how can we develop mental skills to be able to be present in the moment with these unwanted, because your brain doesn't want it. Your brain says like, get rid of it, do something about it.
Yes.
So it takes some kind of skill and learning again to be able to be okay with those moments in life that they are impermanent. They will not last forever.
Yeah. I think that's a really, really important point, because I would imagine that there is this tendency to, okay, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this instead. And that's simply shifting from one thing to another rather than addressing the root. And what you're talking about here is acceptance of ourselves, and also accepting of the fact that the only certainty we have in life is the fact that life is uncertain. And even if it's something that we don't enjoy, it's something we are going to have to face. It's something that we have faced hundreds, if not thousands of times over the course of each of our lives, and something that we have worked our way through. And sometimes I think reflecting back on all of the difficulties and hardships that you've faced and pushed through, including periods of serious uncertainty like COVID, but not only COVID, can help shift or open up that perspective and give us a little bit more sense of power and confidence in our ability to navigate all of the things that life still has in store for us.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes that I have is pain is inevitable, suffering is optional.
Oh, I
So
love
pain
that.
in life, uncertainty is a type of pain, right? Is inevitable. The suffering is optional. Suffering is caused by this mental snowballing, rumination, avoidance. So we need to understand and notice in what ways we add to the pain and we create our own suffering.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a fantastic quote. And I think based on everything that we've talked about today, there is the pain and it's inevitable. There is the reaction to the pain, which is natural. Then there's the more prolonged suffering that we might keep ourselves in as a result of all of these different loops. So having a negative response to pain makes sense, but we also have some autonomy, agency, power, and ability to break that suffering and to move forward in a more productive way. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for all of your time and all of your insights today with regards to what anxiety is, how it shows up, the different ways that it can kind of draw us into a loop, how the loops are maintained, and all of the different ways that we can break the loop, including very easy, very quick interventions like the ones that you shared. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.